Hello and welcome to another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with your host Shelby. And today's episode is going to be on the infamous serial killer Edmund Kemper, and let's get to it. Born Edmund Emil Kemper III on December 18, 1948, he was the middle of two sisters, and he lived with his parents until they split, which inevitably brought in the beginning of a psychological downward spiral. At the age of 14, Kemper was sent to live with his grandparents after running away from his mother's home. On the night of August 27, 1964, after an argument had turned fatal, he shot his grandmother in the back of the head. Then his grandfather got home. Knowing that he was going to be angry and not wanting his grandfather to see his wife's body, Kemper also decided the only thing to do was to kill his grandfather as well. At this time, Kemper's crimes were considered to be too obscure for a 15-year-old to have committed. After his arrest, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and after being told this, he was sentenced to a state hospital, one of which I cannot pronounce the name. I don't want to butcher it, so I'm not going to try. But it was a home for the criminally insane. And after being admitted, he became friends with his counselor, and on December 18, 1969, on his 21st birthday, he was released on parole from the state hospital. At this time, against medical and legal suggestion, Kemper moved back into his mom. The reason this was medically and legally suggested was because his mother was both physically and mentally abusive to Kemper. Soon after moving in, he applied to be a state trooper, but due to his very great size, if you ever look at him, and at the very end I'm going to play an interview, you'll get to see he is a massive man. But due to this, and due to the fact that he wanted to be a motorcycle cop, he was denied of this duty. Then, later, Edmund was part of a motorcycle accident that injured his arm, leaving him unable to work. Unable to work, Kemper had turned his mind to other pursuits. Mind you, he had a side note that he had a 136-point IQ. He noticed a large number of female young hitchhikers on the side of the streets, and with the settlement money he bought a new car, and he had begun to stuff his car with things he would need for his murderous desires. These things were a gun, handcuffs, and a knife. Starting out, Edmund Kemper began picking up young female hitchhikers, but he let them go. However, this changed when he gave a ride to Fresno students Marianne Pejka and Anita Lucchesa. Marianne Pejka died May 5, 1972, at age 18, along with Anita Lucchesa, who was also 18 and died May 5, 1972. He wanted to ape them both, but decided to murder. Ed drove off the highway and went to a dirt road. He handcuffed Mary to the back of the seat and stabbed her. She put up a big fight and bit through the bag she had on her head, and Ed ended up slitting her throat and killing her. Anita also died that day. Kemper forced Lucchesa into the trunk of the car. Once Marianne was dead, he focused on Anita and killed her as well. To leave no witnesses, Ed brought the girls back to his home, undressed them, and dissected their bodies. He decapitated and kept their heads before disposing of them in a ditch. Marianne's head was found in a ravine, and the police later identified Anita's head, but the bodies were never found. Only 4 months later, on September 14, 1972, Edmund picked up Akio Ko, a 15-year-old from Berkeley, California. She decided to get in the car with Kemper instead of waiting for the bus to get her to her dance class. Into the dark of the night, she met the same fate as Marianne and Anita. Once again, 4 months later, on January of 1973, Edmund Kemper fled into a murderous impulse controlling his mind. In the dark of the night, he picked up another hitchhiker named Cindy Schall. After picking her up, she was shot and killed by Kemper. Soon after being brought back to his home where the corpse was hidden, the next day he then dismembered her body, tossing all except her head into the ocean, where they would have been found washed ashore. Edmund then buried her head in his mother's backyard. The school started alerting students at some point to not hitchhike, and if they do, check for school passes on the cars, as they did not believe it was a student. However, on February 5th, 1973, Kemper used the campus parking sticker his mother had given him to facilitate a double murder. He drove to the university, where he offered a ride to two students, Rosalind Thorpe and Elise Liu. Shortly after picking them up, he shot the two young women and drove past the campus security at the gates where the two mortally wounded women were in his car. After the murder, Kemper decapitated his victims and further dismembered the bodies, removing the bullets from the head and disposing of their parts in different locations. On March, some of Thorpe's and Liu's remains were discovered by a hiker near Highway 1 in San Mateo County. After the killing of the two college students, Kemper finally did what he has always wanted to do, and this was to kill his mother. This was in April of 1973. He went to his mother's house, where he got into an argument with her and killed her in her sleep. He used a hammer, and what he said in a documentary that I found interesting was, as I mentioned before, she was both physically and mentally abusive to Edmund. He took her larynx. Now, your larynx, if you don't know, is what helps you to speak. It's what makes you be able to make sound. He took her larynx and he put it in the garbage disposal. And as he put it, this was, and I quote, to shut her up. So this was his figurative way of shutting up his mother, as if killing her was not bad enough. And this was the beginning of the end to the co-ed killer. A little side note, he also decapitated her and cut off her hands. He didn't just take the larynx out. He also did other things that I definitely cannot say on YouTube. If you want to know, look it up. It's a great case. I mean, it's not, let me rephrase that. It's not a great case. It's a terrible case. But it's a psychologically interesting case. So if you want to know more, definitely I would say look it up. But look it up at your own. I'm warning, it's pretty gruesome. Like, probably one of the more gruesome things I've ever read. Soon after murdering his mother, Kemper had called her best friend over for dinner. Thinking she was coming over to have dinner with his mom and Kemper, she came. When she walked through the door, Edmund Kemper grabbed her and strangled her to death. But in his emotional downward spiral, he did not do his body dismantling that he did to his other victims. He stored her in a closet and fled to Pueblo, Colorado. Less than 24 hours from his last killing of his mother and his mother's best friend, he went to Pueblo, Colorado, like I mentioned, and he called the Santa Cruz Police Department. Mind you, he had to call them 7 times just to get them to believe that what he was saying was true, because he was so friendly to the force and a big part of the community. So they didn't believe him at first. They thought he was joking until he repetitively called. And they didn't think that this person that they knew had it in them. So they didn't believe him the first 6 calls. It wasn't until they found the murder site that they believed him. He turned himself in, because for him, all of these people he had been killing were leading up just to killing his mom. That's his main person he really wanted to kill. So after that, he decided he was done. Now, in a documentary I had watched, he mentioned how a few times he would drive and sit across the street from the police station, full on intending to turn himself in. And he'd be drinking. And then he would decide, no, I can't, because that means prison, and that means the end of my life. And I think he said that because he just wanted to kill his mom. He just didn't have the strength to do it yet. At the age of 24, Edmund Kemper III was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. Earlier in October, he was charged and prosecuted where he was found guilty of his crimes on November 5, 1973. The judge asked Kemper what he believes his punishment should be, and he answered that he should be tortured to death by pain and suffering. Instead, all the infamous, quote, co-ed killer, quote, got was 8 consecutive life sentences, where he is still being held today in Vassaville, California. So I could go on and on about Edmund Kemper. There's a lot to go on over his case. I thought I would do more of a shorter timeline with like the basics and the important bits. If you want me to do more, I definitely can. I can do a part 2 with a little more in-depth details if you enjoyed this case. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a great week ahead of you. Thank you for watching. Bye. Just a little side note, but I did intend on putting interviews in this video. I had to crop out when I was talking about the interviews because when I try to upload it, it's a copyright. So unfortunately, I won't have the interviews on here, but what I might do is link the links to the interviews so you guys can watch it and see how big he is and his personality and his actual demeanor. Bye, guys.